So in our previous video, we touched on what an archives is, what are some of the types of records that we have at the archives, and what an archivist does. In this video, I would like to explain what types of records that we have and when we keep them and when we do not keep them, or when they would have been created versus when they wouldn't have been created. So when I explain to students that we have stuff like birth records, death records, marriage records, property records, that usually leads to the question of, do you have my birth records? So for instance, we keep historic records for anyone who is born in Warren County, anyone who has lived in Warren County, or anyone who has died in Warren County. And depending on whether they were born here, whether they lived here, or whether they died here, is what determines if we have those records. So for instance, I like to use the example of William Mason. So William Mason is a Revolutionary War veteran, and he purchased land in Warren County that eventually became the city of Mason. So I like to use him as an example because, first of all, William Mason, so he was born prior to Warren County being a county, and he wasn't born here. So we wouldn't have any of his birth information. But he did, as I pointed out already, purchase land here in Warren County. So we would have some of his land records from when he purchased them. And then also he died here in the early 1830s. So we would have some of the information about his death here at the Warren County Record Center and Archives. But for instance, since he wasn't born here, wherever he was born in whichever state and county, they're the people who would keep his birth records. So that's how we determine whether we do or do not have people's records. So for instance, students ask if we have their records. I like to point out that our records are only 100 to 217 years old. So I always ask, so were you born 100 years ago or more? Which we clearly were not. So we wouldn't have any newer records here at the archives because we only store historic records, so 100 to 217 years. So we wouldn't have any of your records here at the archives. And like I said, let's say for instance William Mason, so he wasn't born here, but he did live here and he died here. Let's say that he died in Tennessee. So his death records would then be in Tennessee and not in Warren County. So I hope that answers some of your questions on what types of records we keep and that we don't have on people.